Welcome everyone. In this module, we are going to simulate an effect of a dry sand using nParticles and nConstraints. So let's get started. Alright, so in this clip, we are going to talk about the nParticles and nConstraints, and we are trying to create an effect of a dry sand effect. So right now in front of me, you can see we have some particles, scattered all across this piece of a geometry. And some of the particles are totally scattered while some of the particles are still in the form of a cluster. Let me play the timeline and show you the effect what we have. And here we go. So I'm using a very simple, primitive. This is the polygon tube and it is totally filled up with the nParticles, and I'm also using some nParticle constraints to make the particles cluster and so that we can also achieve the effect of particle clumping. And once it is allowed to react with the passive collider, it is simply getting broken away. And this is what we want to learn inside this module. So I'm trying to break this effect into three sections. This is simply the very basic one which I'm trying to show, and once we are done with the fundamentals of this technique while using the nParticles, their respective attributes and all, and obviously some nConstraints. Once we are done with this, then I would like to take you further to this effect. The fundamentals are totally the same, the techniques are totally the same, but now we are using different examples, and I have some few more variations of the same effect. And the good thing is that if you just notice carefully, we have the particle scattering and we have the particle clustering as well. So this is something very important. And let me show you another version of this clip. And here we go. So this is something very nice. Some of the particles are clustered, some of the particles are totally scattered on the floor. And once we are done with these two things, then finally I would like to take you to the most important, which is actually the project for this module, that is the utilization of nParticles and nConstraints while creating an effect of a dry sand. And this I'm using a human mesh. You can see the human mesh is totally filled up with the nParticles and nConstraints. And let me play the timeline to show you what we have. This is something really very nice and interesting, but there is one little problem. Not a problem, but something which is everybody hate, that is the time and the computations, a kind of frustration. Once we play the timeline, and it took approximately a lot of time to calculate the frame. Well, the good thing is that we don't have to face such problems, because you might be thinking that these kind of effects are really very intensive, CPU intensive especially. But yeah, at a certain extent they are, because in this case particularly I'm using approximately 350,000 particles along with nConstraints. So definitely it is a little bit CPU intensive. But the good thing is that if I would like to share my stats with you, this whole simulations of approximately 200 frame on a simple i7 machine 4790K, maximum to maximum took 35 minutes to solve this. All right, so this is something which is not really very CPU intensive, although yes, it is taking a bit amount of time. But yes, if we have a concern for the quality, then definitely we have to pay a time. And I think so half an hour or 1 hour is not something which is really very big enough. All right, so now let me just close this and take you inside the Maya. And right here in front of me, you can see I have the high resolution version of the same effect that I just showed you. And in this case, I'm using approximately 70,000 particles. And even with 70,000 particles, you can see the scene is fairly very light. I can very easily navigate, tumble, toggle, dolly in, dolly out very easily, and there is not even a single lag inside my scene. So in my demo examples, I would like to go with fairly lower amount of the particle count, because these are still CPU intensive, and it will take us to unnecessary weight, and this will also slow down the process. So we'll be using some smaller amount of the particle counts. All right, so let's do one thing. Let's create a simple scene from the scratch. All right, and right now I like to use a simple polygon pipe, and let me just scale this up. Just simply reposition this, and this will be the source of our particle. So the best thing we can do is first to make this a little bit more you know subdivide from the subdivision axis, and let's get rid of the histories, go for the feast transform center pivot. And first of all, we would like to fill this empty 3D object with the particles. So what we can do, let's go inside the FX menu and use the nParticles. Over here we have the first command, that is the fill object. Let's move inside the option box. Alright, and right now I'm using fairly high resolutions. If I like to go with the reset setting, you can see the resolutions is 10, which is fairly a less. Let's do one thing, let's go with the very basic settings. Alright, hit the option particle fill, and it just happened instantly. But notice we have only 77 total number of particles, which is absolutely really very less. If I just hide this pipe, you can see we have such a less number of particle count. Well, that's absolutely not the case we are looking for, so we can simply select and delete this. Now again we can select the pipe and go for the fill object command. So the moment you don't feel satisfied with respect to the resolution, you should try experimenting this. I must have to say that with the count of approximately 20 to 25,000 will give you some nice and decent results. So let's do one thing, let's go with the value of somewhere around 45. So let's go with the value of 40 and hit the option particle fill. Select the pipe and hit the option particle fill, and right now we have 9,430. That's quite good for at least for the startup. All right, now press Ctrl A, and I'd like to change the shading section of the particles. So go inside the shading, and instead of the points, let's change them to the sphere. All right, so with that we have a proper 3D particles. So this way we can simply fill the nParticles. And that was all about the settings of the nParticles. Now I would like to take a pause from this clip, and I would like to move to the next clip where I would be showing you the other important attributes of the nParticles for creating an effect of a dry sand. Alright, so see you there.